All right, thanks for joining me. It is Friday, November 6th, 2020. This is episode 26 of Freedom is Scary. And I really didn't even want to do a video about this today. Basically, my wife forced me to because she wanted to hear what I had to say about it, I think. But I think, like many of us, I've heard enough about the election this week. So I think I'll discuss the more interesting topic of, regardless of what happens in this election, um, what's going to happen next? I mean, where do we go from here? I've done a lot of Thomas Paine quotes lately. Here's another good one. Government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. I think what we're looking at here is a intolerable government. Government should always be decreased. It should always be limited. Problems arise when it gets too big. It gets out of control. And you get a place like we have in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, the suburbs of Maryland. You have this behemoth of government. And where is the article in the Constitution dealing with bureaucracy? Where in the Constitution does it mention the Department of Justice, the ATF? Where does it mention the Department of Education? Where does it mention the IRS? Where are all these things mentioned, and where are they governed in the Constitution? They're not. We've allowed the government to get absolutely out of control. So freedom is scary to Karens. And as I've been saying, 2020 has been the year of the Karens. But I think what we're about to see is that government is actually the scary thing, at least to those of us who have studied government. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm in my mobile studio in my Lewisburg, West Virginia office tonight. And I wish I could be home like you right now, having a drink and a cigar. If that's where you are, that's where I should be right now. But I think it is necessary to have dialogue about everything that's happened before we go into this weekend. And it always feels better to get certain things out of your mouth that have been jiggling around in your brain during a week like this. Thanks for joining me. If you're joining the live chat, I don't have anybody moderating any of the comments, but I just figured out that if somebody really spams the comments, like someone tried to do a couple of times ago, I think I do have the mechanism to just completely block you or give you a timeout. So if I see some of that going on, I'll do that. Thanks for joining me, Woodburger Farm. My favorite thing about YouTube, so this is live streaming on both Facebook and YouTube. And also let me know if it breaks up or gets fuzzy. But I have really good internet at this office, so it should be okay, though I'm going wireless. But I love the names on YouTube, because Facebook, generally you're looking at a real person, real name. And YouTube, the reason you get all the crazy comments are because you have people like Woodburger Farm commenting. So I do like the comments. So it is somewhat distracting to me. Again, we'll give a few minutes for anyone else who wants to join. Ralph, appreciate you telling me that. Richard Smith, didn't really know how corrupt the U.S. was until I moved here from the Philippines. Well, buckle up, because I think it's about to get way worse. You know, there was so much corruption already in Washington, D.C., and Donald Trump he threatened some of that, and look what they tried to do to him. I mean, they turned the CIA on him, they turned the FBI on him. I think another Thomas Paine quote that is relevant to this week is probably his most famous quote. And that is that these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives us everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. That's from The Crisis. That's Thomas Paine, and late 18th century. But a lot of what he had to say in the late 18th century is ringing true today. And history does always repeat itself. And at the very beginning of our country, the very first debate about whether to even have a country had to do with, I think, exactly what we're going to deal with right now. And that's the interaction between federal law and the federal constitution and the state law and state constitutions of all the states in this land, in particular, the deep red states, the free states, such as West Virginia. Looking at, I don't want to go too much into the election disputes, what's going on. I've had to work. I do have a day job as a practicing litigator, as a trial lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer, and I've never been busier in my life. And got a lot going on right now. So unfortunately, I couldn't just sit there and follow what's going on with the elections right now. But I do understand this much, and this sort of is something that I've been working on with all this COVID stuff. I'll try to get back to some of these questions as I get through a couple of my points. But, if you don't know, that I sued the West Virginia governor before the state Supreme Court here in West Virginia, challenging the fact that we have one man, a governor, ruling our state like a king, like a dictator, for months and months on end without a legislature. And I knew that could not be constitutional, because we do have a state constitution. And if you read our state constitution, it says it will never be suspended, not even in a time of war. So I brought that to the West Virginia Supreme Court. The governor didn't call a session of the legislature, therefore he can't make new laws. Pretty simple in my mind. Now they rejected it. I have another one pending in federal court challenging our mask mandate here in West Virginia, and also the governor's stay-at-home order, which, believe it or not, is still in effect here in West Virginia. My point is, just going back on some of these COVID tyranny points, is that it's really a similar issue when you talk about what Trump's going to have to do as far as challenging what's happened in some of these states. Because if you look at just the old-fashioned votes, the traditional votes that you have, election day votes, people who came in, or even the early voting, you have a Trump victory, no doubt about it. What happened was a lot of the rules got changed, and it was just like you have the out of control tyrannical governor like we have here in West Virginia, making up new laws as he goes along, making up new rules without a legislature. That's what you've had in a lot of these states. That's what you've had in Pennsylvania, is you had Democrats, lawyers going into all these states, Democrat politicians changing these rules, using governors, using boards of election, whatever. You have non-legislative changes being made to the election laws in these states. And I guarantee you, in all of these battleground states where the lawsuits are being filed, there was no legislation saying, all right, well, we're going to change the way we've had all of these elections before, and now we're going to just allow votes to be counted that were not postmarked or received by election day when everyone else was voting, and that there are not safeguards in place that we traditionally depended on. So you had a change in the rules that was not approved by a legislature. And I think that's going to be something, that's going to be the best argument for Trump to invalidate all of these votes that wouldn't have otherwise counted. I don't think he has to prove fraud. I mean, fraud is very difficult to prove in the practice of law. It can be done. I won a fraud case one time, a civil fraud case, where I sent a vice president of a bank. Well, I didn't send her to prison. She did go to prison. I got a multiple six-figure judgment against her on behalf of an elderly lady who had been defrauded by her. And this lady was the vice president of her bank. And I was able to prove fraud in that civil jury trial. So I know it can be done, but I remember the jury instructions. It's a very, very difficult burden to prove. It's usually by clear and convincing evidence, not the standard 50% plus one that you usually have, the standard in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence. Fraud, you usually have a higher standard, almost like a criminal case. So fraud can be very difficult to prove. And I don't think he needs to prove fraud. We can look at a constitutional argument here. It doesn't matter if these ballots, which under existing state law in a state complied with legislatively passed law. Wait, strike that. That was confusing. Just for instance, Pennsylvania, you have the law that was enacted by the Pennsylvania legislature. A lot of the votes that were being counted this year for Joe Biden do not comply with the law that was enacted by the Pennsylvania legislature. And I don't know exactly what law that is in Pennsylvania. I'm speaking generally, and I think this is the case in several of those states. But if those votes did not comply with the old rule that was enacted by the legislature, signed into law by the governor in their legislative process or their process that's described in their state constitution, then all the president has to do is make the argument that the changes could not be made to their state election law without the involvement of the state legislature. So it's just like these COVID challenges, but also like these COVID challenges, those are difficult to make because it requires judges making difficult decisions that are going to have big time real results. But I think that's where these challenges are going. I don't think they have to prove fraud in all these cases. They just have to show that a certain number of these votes that are being counted did not comply with the law that went through the constitutional process in that state. We can't allow laws to be changed without our elected representatives being involved in that process, because otherwise we have no say. And you can't have a Republican, you can't have a republic, you can't have a constitutional republic if we don't follow the process, if we don't follow the rules. We can't just have a pandemic and say, all right, we're gonna change the rules this year, even without the legislature, because it's necessary, because Dr. So-and-so says it's necessary. If we allow that, we allow the potential for fraud. So it doesn't matter whether fraud actually occurred, and you know it did in places like Philadelphia, but it doesn't matter whether fraud occurred. All it matters is whether votes are being counted that did not comply with election law of the valid statute from that particular state. And you get what I'm saying, but I think that's where that's going. Basically a separation of powers argument. And that's going to be a state constitutional argument for whatever state that's in. And I don't know the state constitution of Pennsylvania or of Nevada or of Arizona or of Georgia. I haven't even read them. I have read the state constitution of West Virginia, and it's a wonderful document, and it has a very strong separation of powers doctrine in it. Unlike the federal constitution, which doesn't actually specifically have a separation of powers provision in it, our state constitution here in West Virginia does. So those are going to be state constitutional challenges. And what's going to happen with that? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. But I think it's a false argument to say, well, without evidence of fraud, there's nothing that can be done. No, because they shouldn't be allowed to change the voting process from what our elected representatives had put in place from last time they met. I think the point here is that if Biden wins, we're going to go back to really another term of Obama, but possibly worse. You're going to have the federal government growing more powerful and more authoritarian, especially as Texas turns blue in years to come. It's going to be difficult to turn back the federal government growing further and further to the left and more authoritarian, because it's going to be difficult for the Republicans to ever beat Democrats again in a national presidential election, unless there's a massive demographic shift with voters in Texas or possibly Florida or New York or California, or unless you have a massive voter base shift. And that's unlikely. But what I think is more likely is that state governments are going to become more important. And that's how it was from the beginning. That was the very first argument with our founding fathers at the creation of our country and our form of government, is how powerful and how sovereign are the state governments going to be as compared to this federal government that we're creating. And history is coming full circle. I believe we're going right back to that. It's going to be basically the same argument that we had when our founders were deciding whether or not they wanted to ratify the Constitution in the first place. And this was back in 1787, 1788. All right, so the two groups then, basically the Republicans and the Democrats, so it was different, were the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And those who supported the Constitution and a stronger national government were known as the Federalists. Those who opposed the ratification of the Constitution in favor of small localized governments were known as the Anti-Federalists. So states' rights, strong state right advocates were the Anti-Federalists. The strong federal government advocates were the Federalists. And they had educated debates and discussions and arguments over which was better. They all wanted to create a successful country, but they disagreed on how to go about doing that. Now, the Anti-Federalists, most Anti-Federalists feared that without some sort of Bill of Rights, that the Constitution would not be able to protect the rights of the individuals and the states. So originally there was no Bill of Rights. That's why there were amendments in the first proposed Constitution. So to get the Anti-Federalist on board, the Bill of Rights were added. One of the strongest voices at the time for the Anti-Federalist was George Mason. This was his quote from 1776, which made its way into the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It might sound familiar. All men are created equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights which they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing the obtaining of happiness and safety. So that was George Mason, 1776. Now the Federalist again, he was an Anti-Federalist. The Federalist, on the other hand, you might have heard of Alexander Hamilton. He was probably the most prominent of the Federalists. But you also had James Madison, John Jay, and they believed that establishing this strong national government was necessary to create a, quote, more perfect union, and would also improve the relationships between the states. So by extending the federal government, they believed that would then protect the individual and minority rights and protect the states better. They thought a stronger federal government would basically trust the government. We're here to help you. And I'd say Ronald Reagan would have been an Anti-Federalist. Trust the large federal government. We're here to help you. We're going to make things better. That was the Federalist argument. For example, Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist number 9 in 1787 Quote, the proposed Constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government. So George Mason, on the other hand, on behalf of the Anti-Federalists, believed that these state bills of rights that they had in their individual state constitutions would get pushed aside by this new national constitution and would not be adequate to protect people, to protect individual citizens from tyrannical government. And that was, again, the concern that made everybody agree to include the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And in fact, that was a condition for several states to agree to join this country, including Virginia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York, if you believe it or not. So what do we have now? Basically, the shit has hit the fan, so to speak, in this election. We have recounts in multiple states. We have the vote by mail because it was supposedly necessary due to the pandemic. And I think the fact of the matter is that Democrats, they didn't want people, and they still don't want people to have to even show an ID to vote. Now, why not? We all know why not. Because voter fraud generally helps Democrats because they want to commit voter fraud, whereas the Republican Party has wanted voter ID laws. Now, here's the crazy thing is that here in West Virginia, I can't mail in my driver's license renewal, can I? No, I have to make an appointment because the DMV is locked behind a closed door right now, but I have to physically go in there to the DMV to get my driver's license renewed. I can't just mail it in. What about my concealed weapon permit? Nope, I can't just mail that in. I got to go in there in person. Pretty much anything that Democrats actually care about or that the government actually cares about, other than voting, you have to go there in person. You have to be fingerprinted or you have to sign. You have to show them your ID. But all that's been thrown out the window for voting. And the reason is because there are people who want fraudulent votes to be counted. And if that's the new world that we're going to live in, then the Republicans are going to have to resolve to cheat, or they're not going to be able to compete, or they're going to have to make sure that the elections going forward in the future are going to be real elections where people have to actually show up or use absentee ballots. In my opinion, we ought to go back to the way our founding fathers set things up. And that was election day. It was like a party. When it came time to vote, everybody was there and people were drinking and partying and you were watching people vote. There was no going behind a curtain and voting. Like, you voted and out loud. Like, you would have to tell your colleagues, your neighbors, everybody how you voted. And, there would be boos or there would be cheers. And it was people probably would be horrified by that today. But what does that tell you? That things have changed so much. It used to be something that was celebrated was voting, and it was a social event. And you knew where your fellow man or woman fellow man stood because we knew what we were doing back then, didn't let women vote. But there's a lot of things we need to go back to. That was a joke, by the way. Not really, but it was a joke. So what is it going to look like now if Joe Biden wins the election? You have a Donald Trump who's no longer president of the United States. Here's my take on that. All right. We've seen the rallies with Trump as opposed to the rallies with Biden. No enthusiasm at all for Biden. Trump has never before seen level of enthusiasm. He has a base that's stronger than any presidential candidate in American history. I think without a doubt, he's not going anywhere regardless of what happens. In fact, I think he continues to be a leader because he's a leader now and his base loves him. He's going to continue to be a leader. And if you think about it in those terms, perhaps he even becomes more powerful than a President Joe Biden. And we've seen how the Democrats were able to weaken President Trump in his 4 years in office with all the Russia hoax. I mean, they hampered him at every step. He wasn't able to get things done, hardly. So there are a lot of difficulties when it comes to being president because you can't just do everything yourself. You have to get people to cooperate with you. You have to get these bureaucracies under control. You have to get Congress to cooperate with you. And as of right now, a President Biden will not have a Democrat Senate, and he won't have really a strong Democrat House. And they lost seats in the House. So he's going to have difficulties. Now, bear with me. With a post-presidential Trump, what can he accomplish there that he wasn't able to accomplish as the president of the United States with those restrictions? I think he continues to lead his base, his movement that he created. And we've seen Trump with his Twitter, with his rallies. I bet you he continues on. He's not going anywhere, even if he loses. And I think he trolls Joe Biden on an epic level, never before seen in world history for the next 4 years. And everything they did to him, imagine he's got nothing else that he has to do for the next 4 years. Nothing else he has to do. And he could run again if he wanted to. He could keep having rallies. He might not being able to continue to use Twitter because they have been censoring him. And I have no doubt that they'll ban him or they'll try to stop him in some way. But you won't be able to stop Trump. I mean, if you know anything about him, which you do, whether you want to admit it or not, I mean, he's motivated. He'll find a way to do it. Yeah, Trump is the epitome of trash talker. That's right. You hit him, he hits back. And I think there's a lot of Americans on both sides that respect that. And a lot of people don't. Women voters, women voters. I mean, a lot of people don't like, arguments. They don't like the trash talking, but I think the men do, the men voters. And I think it's going to reach epic proportions if he loses. I mean, it's not like he's going anywhere. He's not going away regardless. I mean, Donald Trump's not going away. He's not going away. The only way he's going away, and this is my next point. The only way Trump's going away is if they try to deep state him again. So say James Comey gets back into the FBI. He's now, again, the director of the FBI. And they come after Trump. Say they indict him. They indict Trump. They try to put Trump in federal prison. I don't think they'll try to do that. Not that they don't want to. But I think if they do that, then I think a civil war will happen. I think that will be the point of no return. I think that's the only way that we actually get a civil war out of this. I think that's the only way it's happening. As long as they don't try to deep state Trump, which I believe would be the end of our republic anyways. Now, they could have done it before he got elected. They could have done it before, but they can't do it now. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. Who knows? I'm sure many of them will try. But if they do it, I think we're looking at the end of our country. I think we are looking at a civil war. 2.0 if that happens, but they won't do it. He's too powerful now. He's more powerful than Joe Biden, regardless what happens. Joe Biden has no respect. Joe Biden has no base. From the very beginning, whether it was Joe Biden or anybody or Bernie Sanders, 48% of the country was going to vote whoever had the D in front of their name anyways. We all know that. It was a vote against Trump, not for Joe Biden. Nobody's excited about Joe Biden. He's never going to be the leader that Donald Trump was to some large movement of people who were excited about his ideas or anything like that. And I think he retains that power. I mean, being a leader of men is a very powerful thing. And that is going to continue. And I think it's going to continue basically with just an epic amount of trolling by Trump. Speaking of trolling, Jim, you follow me everywhere. I know you have the Trump derangement syndrome very, very bad. You keep calling me a Trump cultist. That is a great little catchword that you guys have been using. And it isn't that just like the left to accuse people of not being able to think critically for themselves. So I'm not able to come up with my own ideas, my own thoughts. I must have been tricked into joining a cult if I wanted to vote for Trump and not Joe Biden. I mean, never mind that I voted for that loser Romney. Then I voted for McCain before that. I voted for Bush both times. I mean, never mind that. I was completely tricked into voting for Trump. Actually, it was Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin actually tricked me first into supporting Trump because I was gonna vote for Hillary. I was super excited about Hillary. And then Vladimir Putin, he just tricked the hell out of me. But now you know how cults are. Once you're in the cult, you can't get out of the cult. So I'm stuck in the cult now. And I'm sure Jim will come up with lots of great ideas to get me out of the cult, change my mind, break me out of the trance that I'm in. Mother Russia. Exactly. Mother Russia. Putin sent you an email as well, 007. Yeah. It was like Inspector Gadget. It's an email, and then you have to delete it immediately or else it explodes, or your computer explodes. All right. Ocean Reef, who is Jim? Just look up a couple statements ahead of you. Jim, anything I post on Facebook, Jim's on there immediately, giving me the leftist point of view. Mark Miller, cult, the personality, maybe right versus left. You can leave a cult, you're in a gang. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a good thing or bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. I am in a gang. I'm in an awesome gang. All right. So what's up with the Canova PD? I grew up in that town. Well, you must be referring to the James Dean case. If you haven't seen the video, it was a new video that I had posted to the YouTube channel having to do with my client, James Dean, who passed away tragically following his arrest by the Canova Police Department. I'm not sure what's up with them, other than it was just a crazy case, a tragic case. It just wasn't right. And so I sort of documented it in that video, but it took us over a year to just get the medical examiner's report in that case. And that's why it's going so slow. And there will be civil litigation, and hopefully I'll do an update video soon. But I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of experience with Canova PD prior to this. This is the only case I've ever had involving them. And I don't know that I've ever even really been to that county, Wayne County, West Virginia. But I suppose I'll get there soon. But follow along, and you'll hear an update soon with that case. Pirate InfoWars. Is there enough for the Trump team to make it on so many suits in so many places? Thoughts? Well, this is the most upsetting thing to me. It's like there's a fight going on, and I wasn't invited to it, and there's nothing I can do about it. All they got to do is send me an email. They're the government. They can find my cell phone number. All they have to do is call, and I'm on it. Just tell me what to do. I'll be there. I want to fight that fight. I want to take on the fraudsters in Philadelphia. Like, they need to put me on that case. It's frustrating to see these legal battles going on. There's nothing I can do to help. But the problem with practicing law is you can't just go and search yourself into controversies. Somebody has to call you and ask you to help them. So Trump hasn't called me, so there's nothing I can do yet. So I don't know if they have enough. I assume they have enough people. I mean, most lawyers are Democrats. They have armies of Democrat lawyers. I assume they have enough. I don't know that. Sweet name, Black Ops Juju. Hope you're doing great. Really glad I came across your channel. Big shout out from Beckley. Thanks for following Black Ops. And I'm really glad that you guys got a new prosecutor there. That was one of the few political races that I got involved with here in West Virginia. Well, I wouldn't say I got involved, but when I found out that there was this challenger to the prosecutor's race in Raleigh County, West Virginia, I got super excited and got to know the guy. His name's Ben Hatfield. And he challenged the longtime incumbent Democrat prosecutor in that county, and he won. Big upset. And she'd been there, I think, since the 80s in some capacity. Been there a long time. And, there should be term limits for everybody. But I think we need to start looking more at these prosecutor races around the country. See, the Democrats, for all their problems, they have a lot of good things going on for them. And that's that they are united mostly. They're united mostly, and they're willing to set aside their differences where there are differences and work together for their common good. I mean, that's sort of how communists are anyways. And because it's ingrained in them, because if you don't, you're either up against a wall or you're thrown out of the helicopter. But I think the Republicans or whoever the conservative challengers are, if the libertarians were able to get enough support, which they don't have, whoever's challenging these people, they need to get their act together. They need to get their act together. So you have George Soros on behalf of the Democrats getting all of these Democrat prosecutors elected all over the place in places you've heard of this year, where they've had problems in St. Louis and where else? St. Louis and Baltimore and all over Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, all these Northern Virginia counties. All these George Soros Democrat prosecutors have gotten elected. Soros had contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to their campaigns, and it's all going under the radar. Why? Because finally we're realizing where are the battles fought. They're not fought on the battlefield anymore as they were with the Civil War in the 1860s. They're going to be fought by lawyers and judges in the courts or by people working on their behalf. Everything's going to be fought in the courts. The Republicans need more lawyers. They need more lawsuits. They need more investigators. They need more money. They need more prosecutors. And Soros, he's smart. The prosecutor positions are extremely important around the country. And they're able to do a lot of things that people don't even understand that they do. And the conservatives should have been doing that same thing. And it's good that your particular county got rid of the longtime Democrat and put in a Republican prosecutor, because where these are partisan elections, if you know nothing else about a prosecutor, you have to assume that they adopt their party's platform. And we all know what the Democrat Party's platform is. And that is not equal justice for all. It's social justice. It's not having the natural right to defend yourself with firearms, including scary black rifles. It's AR-15 should be illegal. You should only defend yourself with a shotgun by shooting somebody in the kneecap. And, harassing private citizens for exercising their Second Amendment rights. If you don't know anything else, you have to assume that they adopt their party's platform of trying to end the so-called gun violence. So good on you guys for electing Ben Hatfield. I think that's going to be a great decision. They're really in West Virginia everywhere. Going back to the states' rights things, state governments are, I think we've come full circle. State governments are going to become very, very important and powerful, because no matter what Joe Biden tries to do, or whoever comes after him, Kamala Harris, tries to do with the federal government, the states are going to be able to resist them. The state attorney generals, the state legislatures, they are going to be able to resist. What's the federal government going to use against the states? They're going to use the courts. Their mistake was in not appointing enough federal judges. They left lots of vacancies for Trump, and Trump jumped on that. He appointed all these federal judges, as many as he could, and now he's got 3 Supreme Court justices. So that was their big arena to fight in, was the federal judiciary. And now they're going to have a more difficult time doing that. So they're going to push forward with, I think you'll see executive order after executive order after executive order. I think President Joe Biden would look like our Governor Jim Justice here in West Virginia, who's issued several hundred executive orders since the COVID-19 started. I mean, seriously, go to the West Virginia governor's website and look at the list of executive orders from January till now. I mean, when I first sued him before the Supreme Court of West Virginia, I wanted to include at first all of the executive orders. And this is back in, when did we first sue him? That was in June or July. I wanted to include all of the executive orders that he had issued because we're challenging them. But when I went to print them all out and include them on the appendix for the filing, just the executive orders themselves were 2 or 3 times beyond the page limitation of what you're allowed to even give to the court. That's how long they were. I think that's what you would see with a President Joe Biden, is executive tyranny, executive overreach, where he's trying to use the office of the presidency as basically a pulpit for a dictator to make things illegal, or tell the states what they can do or what they can't do without Congress being involved. So we've come full circle with states' rights. The principle of federalism that was debated between George Mason and Alexander Hamilton has come full circle, and it's going to be important now. Here in West Virginia, there was a complete red wave. And West Virginia, like many of the other, I wouldn't call it a southern state, because I grew up in the deep South. And I think West Virginia is sort of a border state. It has a lot of northern aspects to it, and then it does have a lot of southern aspects to it. I mean, it's an Appalachian state, really, but it's a rural state. And like the other rural states, like the southern states, they were all Democrat controlled for most of the 20th century. And one by one, they flipped to Republican control. And there's a number of reasons for that. But you had a change in the national parties. So for a while now, West Virginia had been controlled on a state and local level by Democrats, but yet they had voted against Obama twice, big time, and they had voted for Bush twice on a national level. But then Democrats still had a lot of seats and control over the state legislatures, the state governor. But now Trump brought total devastation to the Democrats in West Virginia, especially here where I am in the Greenbrier Valley. I think the only Democrat that survived the red wave was a Democrat sheriff incumbent. And that's pretty much it. It was total devastation. The Democrat Party here in the Greenbrier Valley is completely dead. It killed them dead. And I've seen people on social media, local liberals. They're just beside themselves, upset. They just cannot believe that pretty much every Democrat at the state and local level got absolutely destroyed. Now, here in West Virginia, the Republicans in the House, the lower house, the House of Delegates, have a over 70% super majority now. Now, unfortunately, our governor got elected pretending to be a Republican, though he's actually a Democrat. That will be cured. That will be cured in the next election. But he coasted through only by riding that wave. And I think that's probably what you've seen in lots of states. And I don't think there was one state where Democrats had gained control of any state legislature in the whole country in this election. Everybody rode Trump's wave, and Trump did very well, regardless of all these added votes that have been counted, these mysterious votes. He did very well. He won Florida. Remember who couldn't win Florida? He won Ohio. Remember who couldn't win Ohio? Remember McCain and Romney, and their performance was pathetic compared to President Trump. He brought all these people to victory all over the country, and that's why I'm saying that he's not going anywhere. He is going to continue as a leader, and why wouldn't he? He's going to, all he would have to do is endorse any candidate in the country in a conservative or a rural area, and boom, they're elected. He could just be a kingmaker if he wanted to. So a couple comments about West Virginia specifically, but I think all these states, and I haven't been following the other states, but all these states are going to have something similar. And so you have a more conservative, a more red state. It's going to have the ability to increase or liberalize the rights of their citizens. And I hope that happens. I hope that continues to happen, that we use this experience to celebrate freedom. And states have the ability to give their citizens more freedom than they had for years and years and years, to lower taxes, to reduce the size of government. And I hope it happens. We have a 45% mixed influx of Republicans and Democrats into the independent party in West Virginia. Well, here in West Virginia, I was doing everything I could to try to get the independent candidate elected to governor. And just like has kind of happened with the presidential campaign, the COVID tyranny was used to suppress his efforts to even get on the ballot. They didn't give him any break. And isn't that funny? They want to make voting so much easier for Biden voters. And here in West Virginia, we got no break on the amount of signatures that the independent candidate had to come up with to get on the ballot. It had to be 7,000 something in 2019 with no COVID-19, and it had to be 7,000 something here this year during the middle of the pandemic. So the governor says there can be no groups of 25 or more people together. And how are you supposed to get signatures when you can't even have get-togethers of 25 or more people? all of the usual get-togethers that every other year occur or every other election cycle occur. They didn't occur. And yet he still came so close. Not even the courts gave him any relaxation of those rules. So he had to run as a write-in candidate. And running as a write-in candidate, there were polling places who were pretending that there were no certified write-in candidates. So we were dealing with voter suppression here in West Virginia of an independent candidate. And I think that whoever the candidate is that supports freedom, aside from the presidential election, that person should not, that's who I'm going to support. Because it doesn't matter whether it's an R or a D, because look at our governor. He was a D, he put an R there, but it means nothing. His policies didn't change. He didn't become more conservative. He raised taxes, he raised debt, he created a mask mandate. I mean, he did all this COVID stuff that the governor of New Jersey or Louisiana or New York was doing. I mean, in what way was he a Republican? If he's a Republican, then what does that mean? So I think that here in West Virginia, we do need to look at if we're going to let just all the Democrats become rhinos, then what's the point of that of flipping the state to Republican, if that just meant that all the smart Democrats moved to the Republican Party? Then the old Republican Party might have to become the independent party. But the point is, I think that state party politics in all of these states is going to have to become way more important, because it's going to be way more important. Joe, we need to get rid of the red and the blue parties, keep it libertarian and independent. I mean, I like a lot of what the Libertarian Party said. I'm probably a libertarian myself, but as far as presidential politics, we may not even be in this position if it were not for all of the libertarian votes. I don't deny that you have the right to do it. I know that you've been told 100 times that you're throwing your vote away, but this is the sad reality of it. Is the libertarian vote on the national level, or at least in the states where it mattered, such as Pennsylvania, took away from a vote that would have gone to Donald Trump and now has gone to Joe Biden. Now, I think states politics can always be state politics. We're furious here in Pennsylvania. Well, do you remember when they were saying, I know you do if you're in Pennsylvania, that what did they call Pennsylvania for the Republican candidate? They called it fool's gold. Remember, they mocked people for even thinking that a Republican candidate could win Pennsylvania. And look what Donald Trump did in Pennsylvania. And yet they still mock him. But look at the support he got there in Pennsylvania, which he would have won, or he would win without all the mysterious new votes that were counted, that according to the changes in Pennsylvania law were allowed to not be postmarked or not even be signed. I mean, give me a break. It's like saying, well, you can't prove fraud because you don't have a video of it. It's like the difference between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Saying that you can't prove that they're committing fraud in Pennsylvania, that's like saying you can't prove that I committed murder because you don't have a video of me murdering the guy. Yeah, there's a knife with my fingerprints on it. There's footsteps through the snow leading from my front door to his front door, and there's droplets of blood on my clothes, but you don't have a video of it. And that's basically the same logic that they're using in states like Pennsylvania, that, well, you can't prove the fraud. You can't prove it. You can't prove it. And so I would be furious as well in Pennsylvania. And I think a lot of us are furious outside of Pennsylvania, especially here in West Virginia, where there was not a single blue county in the entire 55 counties of West Virginia. Go look at a meme about it. A map of West Virginia showing the counties. All 55 counties were red. All 55 counties were red. So, yeah, all of our votes are basically thrown away if Biden wins. Let's see. Peanut whistleblowers are coming forward in Pennsylvania. I hope so. I mean, I hope he has enough lawyers, and if anybody knows Trump, and he needs one other lawyer, and he needs a real pit bull, you know how to get a hold of me. I will clear my calendar to fight. Just tell me where to go, who to sue, what to do. It's frustrating not being allowed to or able to engage in that fight. Pennsylvania has more love for Biden, obviously. Well, they have Philadelphia. You know, every one of these states, other than West Virginia, has a place like that. So Virginia has Northern Virginia, and Illinois has Chicago, and you know they all have these. And West Virginia really doesn't have one. We're just a completely rural state. Edward, Democrats are intolerable. We should not tolerate them. Well, what I was saying is that the government is intolerable. So government is intolerable. Yeah, if Democrats are going to be controlling the government, then it'll really be intolerable. Fabricated votes. All right, we got our first spammer. I'm going to put you in timeout. How about that? All right, Jim's back. Both sides are corrupt. Absolutely, Jim. Finally, we agree on something. There is corruption on both sides. And when I was involved in politics in Florida, when I was getting my political science degree, I saw this firsthand. How there was a lot of backstabbing just within the Republican Party there. So definitely there is corruption on both sides. Terry, the election is in the position it is because of the independent national vote, 45 million registered. Danny, don't forget, give me free stuff plus the stuff that the person worked for. Yep, I think that's what, as long as Schumer doesn't get in control of the Senate, then it's going to be hard for them to give out too much free stuff. Now, you saw what Obama was able to do with his Obama phones and all that. So it will still happen. But just imagine what would happen if they had control of the Senate as well. Aaron, I think an independent wave is coming. People are getting tired of the left or right only having a voice. And that is where the corruption really lies, is in either the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. Is the one thing that they all can agree on is they don't want any sort of challenge to their authority. So I don't see how it's possible to create another party. And that's our country was designed to have multiple parties, if any parties. It was not designed for just a Democrat and a Republican Party. But that's the way it's ended up. But that's where the corruption really, really is seen, is if you try to challenge that in any way. Jay, these fools work on decades, not years of term. And, the funny thing is, Aaron, with a lot of the policies, I mean, even Obama, other than his executive orders and then Obamacare, I mean, what did he really do that was all that different than the policies of the Bush administration? I mean, he still was waging war in Afghanistan. I mean, really, Trump was a lot different than either the Bush administration or Obama. He was really the only one saying, well, let's stop getting involved in foreign wars. Obama was just as hardcore at getting us bogged down in foreign policy issues or foreign disputes. So a lot, there really weren't all that many differences between Obama and Bush. But I do think that there was a big difference between both Obama and Bush and Donald Trump. Peanut, you're a libertarian. Let's see, Mark, grew up in Mason County but live in Florida, and you're right. Our governor has been awesome down here. Well, where do you live in Florida now, Mark? If I see your comment, I grew up in Melbourne, Florida, and I went to UCF for undergrad, and so I lived in Orlando as well. But and now in Mason County, you got a Republican prosecutor there too elected, and that was Seth Gaskins. So again, it was a red wave in West Virginia, and there's no doubt that Trump brought them all through. You look at everybody who won in West Virginia, they all were very vocal in their support for Donald Trump. They all were participating in the Trump trains. They had the Trump flags. And, he should be very, 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 proud of the tremendous effort that he gave in this election. I mean, nobody could have worked harder than he did. I don't know how he had the energy to do it, really. Holly, this is, again, pertaining to West Virginia. You wrote in Marshall Wilson. I did too. That was the first time I've ever written in a candidate in any election. Is this year, and I know I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Terry, I'm not sure if you're talking about the Republican Party or the Independent. We're the only party that is conservative about government and liberal about freedom and individual rights. And that's a good point that the American left, the Democrats primarily, they love to take words and redefine them for their own uses. The word liberal really should be applied to conservatives, for people who want more liberty for individuals. And that's not always with conservatives, because there are a lot of conservatives out there that want to impose their views on others. So it's not always black and white. But for the most part, at least now in 2020, and in the past few years, it's the conservatives who are supporting liberty for individuals, whereas the so-called liberals, they don't want liberty. They want authoritarianism. But they've been able to use those terms, and also the term progressive, but they're really not. They're more regressive. Kevin, Bruce Sloan, Greenbrier County. Yeah, so that, when I mentioned there was one Democrat, I think, that survived, that's who it was. And of course, it's not a political position for the most part of being a sheriff. And that was the sole survivor, the last survivor of the red wave in the Greenbrier Valley here. All politics is local. That's true, but a lot of these things aren't going to hold up anymore. But that's something they always said, is all politics is local. Good point. One other thing that's going to happen here is we can get ready to pay more for gas. And so you in Pennsylvania, and also what sucks here in West Virginia, is now the candidate who looks like is getting elected wants to stop fracking. Well, what's that going to mean? That's going to mean you're going to lose a lot of jobs. Pennsylvania is going to lose a lot of jobs. Whereas all the people who they're counting now from Philadelphia, I mean, they're not losing jobs. Hell, they probably don't have jobs anyways, a lot of them. But all the rural countryside voters, they're going to lose a lot of jobs. The energy sector is going to take a big hit. And what's going to happen to the gas prices? They're going to go way up. And now all the low information people that weren't able to connect A to B, the fracking and gas policy to how much they have to pay for gas at the gas pump, they'll finally figure that out when they have to start paying the Obama era prices for gas. And then, of course, that has a chain reaction, whereas the car dealerships are going to sell less cars and the car manufacturers are going to have to start making the smaller cars, less trucks. All right. Excuse me. Draconian gun laws would be unconstitutional and therefore illegal. All right. You're answering mushrooms question. So let me look at mushrooms first. Really want you to address this. How do you feel about jury nullification if Biden passes draconian gun laws? Well, unfortunately, Biden can't pass gun laws himself. What I see him doing, as long as the Republicans hold the Senate, I don't see that happening. Short of that, I think you'll see executive orders, and I think you'll see a more tyranny from the ATF, which they were really doing it under Trump as well. And a lot of Second Amendment advocates were very unhappy with Trump because he allowed the bump stock ban. But Trump, his biggest problem is he was never able to bring the massive bureaucracy under control. So if he couldn't control the FBI or even the CIA, it's hard to get that angry with him for not being able to control the ATF either, because these people are all very clearly out of control. But I think you'll really see them out of control with the President Biden. And so I think the ATF, all they have to do is just start reclassifying things. So then there's already discussion about pistol braces, which have been completely legal under the ATF policies. Now they're going to change their mind and make things illegal, at least in their opinion. And you're going to see executive orders from a President Biden that is going to adopt Beto's opinions on gun control, so-called gun violence, and they're going to try to enact all sorts of executive order legislation. So that's why it's going to be important for the states to assert their sovereignty when it comes to things that that are within their control under the Constitution. So the federal government is limited under the federal Constitution. And all rights not expressly delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. So the states need to fight any of this and continue to liberalize their gun rights from within their states. And so your question is jury nullification. So I think if Biden issues an executive order that says that AR-15s are illegal and you get caught with an AR-15, and the prosecutor prosecutes you, which again is a good reason to make sure that you understand who your prosecutor is. And when those elections come up, get involved, because they're partisan elections. Like I said, is your prosecutor Democrat or Republican? And this is why it might matter. So the Democrat prosecutor uses the Joe Biden executive order to prosecute you. And I mean, that's kind of an unlikely scenario, but I would feel great about jury nullification in that circumstance. And what that is if you're on a jury and you're told what the law is by the judge. So the theory of jury nullification is that even though you believe that the defendant did what's alleged and the judge has instructed you that the law consists of what the defendant did, because you don't agree with the law or you don't think it's fair, you just find him not guilty anyways. And that's jury nullification. Now, the thing about jury nullification is that you don't know when it happens, because the jury doesn't have to, there's no box that they check for nullification. They just find the person not guilty. So a lot of times you're assuming that that's what they did. So I've had this work against me too. It's the same process. So if I have a civil rights lawsuit where I've got it on video, a police officer beating somebody unnecessarily, it's on video, and I take it to a jury, but the jury just doesn't like my client because he's got tattoos on his hands and he smokes marijuana, whatever. And I have a jury that hates marijuana and they hate tattoos, and they really back the blue. So even though it's on video, they say we don't care, and they vote in favor of the police officer. That's happened to me before. That's why I think in the context of a criminal case, I think it's always better to have somebody found not guilty. Now, in the context of enforcing the Constitution and preserving and protecting people's rights, I think it's important that nobody's rights get nullified in that situation, that we have to protect the rights of everybody. But if you're talking about criminal prosecutions, I'm always for a not guilty if that's the fair and just thing to do, because the state is never entitled to a conviction. And so that was the question, and somebody else answered that. Where was that? Oh, well, I lost it. We've gotten lost in the comments here. All right, Jim's back. Yeah, they are cracking down on guns here in West Virginia. I think that's my point, Jim, is that they're not going to crack down on guns here in West Virginia because the Republicans are in charge. And West Virginia has become a very, very good gun state. We have constitutional carry, so you don't even have to have a concealed weapons permit to carry a concealed firearm here in West Virginia, because our legislature made it happen. So there are a lot of pro-freedom reforms that have been made for gun rights, and they've been done by the state legislatures. Randy Fink, shut up! You're acting stupid. And no, he's not. He's not just trolling this video. He trolls me all the time on Facebook, but I think he is a good sport about it. He does at least try to argue. But this is their argument, is that, oh, Biden doesn't want your guns. He doesn't want your guns. He's not going to take your guns. He's literally said that. So, Jim, your argument is that he's not going to take our guns because you're using a different definition of the word guns. You're talking about Grandpa's shotgun with birdshot in it. That's what you're talking about. That's not going to get taken away. That's not going to get confiscated. But what is going to get taken away are AR-15s. And are you using that in your definition of guns, Jim? Because Biden has said that he wants a ban on so-called assault weapons, which he's referring to AR-15s. That's what he wants to do. Excuse me. He doesn't want you to be able to own an AR-15. Wow, it's been a long week. He doesn't want you to be able to own an AR-15. He doesn't want you to be able to use it in self-defense. I mean, he doesn't want you to have a concealed weapon. He doesn't want it. So, I mean, I don't know how you can make that argument. All right. Let me try some water then. I just need some whiskey. Why won't judges inform juries of the right to nullification? That's a good question. The reason judges will not inform juries of the right to nullification is because it's not actually a right. I mean, it's not written down somewhere. It's only a right in practice. There is no option that they get to choose nullification. And you're right that the lawyers can't expressly say, now what I want you to do is you go in there to the jury room and you take a vote. Everybody vote for nullification. We can't say you have three options: guilty, not guilty, or nullification. We have to, and I'm talking about as a defense lawyer here, the prosecutor is never going to argue for nullification. So that's something only the defense would want in a criminal case. So you're going to imply it. So you're going to say, you're going to argue reasonable doubt. Always in a criminal case, the defense, they've got it locked up, but it's an unjust statute. It's an unjust statute, but they've got it locked up. The guy did it. The lawyer can always argue the lack of reasonable doubt, or the existence of reasonable doubt, rather. The prosecutor didn't meet their burden of proving beyond any reasonable doubt. And they absolutely, you just make sure that they know that they have the ability to come back with a not guilty just because there's a reasonable doubt, and they don't have to list the reasonable doubt. They're not going to get questioned on what the reasonable doubt is. Nobody gets to second question them. You just make sure that they know that it's up to them, that they can go guilty or not guilty. They don't have to answer to anybody for it. And then you make the case for sympathy. And so you have to beat around the bush. You can't expressly say, I want you to go in there. And even though you believe that it's been proven that he did it, that you're to not comply with the law. You can't advise the jury to not comply with the law. They have to be instructed in what the law is, and the judge gets to tell them they have to comply with the law. So you have to kind of beat around the bush when it comes to that. So yeah, if you were to use the word jury nullification at a trial, you'd probably be looking at a mistrial. Ex-bootlicker. I wonder what happened to make you an ex-bootlicker. They're having a press conference on the postmaster having employees backdate ballots. Pendulum swings left and right. Resistance. All right, Mark, and you're asking about jury nullification here. Even if the law is immoral. Yeah, I mean, there's no mechanism in the law that defines what moral is and what moral is not. I guess that is, our morality is kind of codified into the statutes themselves, but the word moral isn't really used in court. Now, maybe it's a part of some statutes when it comes to legal intent or something like that, but no, you're not allowed. There's no jury instruction that if you think this law is immoral, you can find the person not guilty. You just have to have a good lawyer that makes the argument that convinces the jury that the right thing to do is to come back with a not guilty verdict. So it's very much an art and not a science. But sometimes what prosecutors will do is bring up jury nullification when the court is picking the jury. Does anybody know what jury nullification is? Does anybody have any opinions on jury nullification one way or the other? Now, if you do have an opinion on jury nullification and you want to sit on the jury, you probably don't want to express an opinion one way or the other on jury nullification during jury selection, because you'll get knocked out. So when jury nullification happens, it's like Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is nobody talks about Fight Club. Well, the first rule of jury nullification is that nobody talks about it. So I once had a case, it's a felony criminal case, where my client, and this is somewhat of an example, I think, of jury nullification, where my client had been married for umpteen decades. All right. Maybe they've been married 40 years. And the wife was just very overbearing. This guy was pretty quiet. And you could tell that she was, nagging would be putting it politely. She was an aggressive lady. And this had gone on for decades. And finally, one day he snapped. And this was I think it was Super Bowl Sunday. He's just trying to watch the Super Bowl. And she was she was running her mouth. Just attacking him, just viciously. And finally, he had enough. He basically had kind of grabbed her by the hair, smacked her, and said whatever he was going to say. And he grabbed the pistol that was in the drawer where they always keep it, and he fired it off next to her head, and he drug her out of the house by her hair and threw her outside and fired it off again in the air. She calls police. The police show up. They arrest him, and now he's in big trouble. They indict him on multiple felonies, 2 felonies for wanton endangerment with a firearm under West Virginia law. Basically, he gets both of those. He's going to prison for a long time. Under the statute, there was no possibility for parole or probation just with one of those convictions, and they had charged him with 2. So prosecutor says, nope, we're not making a deal. We don't need to make a deal. We got this case locked up. We have the case locked up. And my guy had admitted it, basically. He admitted everything that happened, just like I said it. And I'm paraphrasing. It's been a long time. But it was generally as I had said it. So we had the trial. There was nothing was offered by the prosecution. And we were able to get mostly men on the jury. Mostly men on the jury. And there's still, 12-person jury. There were 2 women on the jury, to my recollection. And so we have the trial. And so now I don't remember if my client testified or not. I don't think so. But the wife gets up and testifies. And I get to cross-examine her. And all of a sudden, the jury, you could see they got it when they heard her testimony. And, that was part of my strategy was to give them a look at what his life had been like for the past 40 or 50 years, with her just aggressively, going after him. And so I had got her just responding to me. She's snapping back at me, and they, all of a sudden, you could see in their eyes. I like to watch the jurors and see what they're paying attention to. And you could see that all of a sudden they understood what this guy had been dealing with. So I had made the there was no doubt that he had fired the gun twice, and that's what he was charged with. So I made the argument to the jury that, look, we look at the science. They say I don't like science. I like science. You look at the science, we knew what the trajectory of the bullets were. One bullet went out this way, one bullet went up that way, undisputedly. So there was no chance, a 0% chance of either one of those bullets hitting her in the direction in which they were fired. So I looked at the law and I said, it's something like there has to be a chance. I don't remember what the exact language was, but there had to be some chance that this person's going to be seriously injured or dead as a result of this person shooting their gun. And so I said, well, they indicted him twice. There were 2 shots. Given the trajectory, neither one was going to hit. So, and look, she just made him snap. Look, he actually never been in trouble before. He's just trying to watch the Super Bowl. So it was just kind of an argument like that. And what do you know? The jury comes back and they find him not guilty on both of those. Now I think he got a misdemeanor for when he grabbed her and smacked her, but he had already been to jail when he got arrested. So he got out with after that trial, he got I think it was no fine, no jail time. He got time served, whatever the punishment was. He walked out and the judge said, he's like, I'm kind of surprised. You're lucky. Your attorney basically saved your ass. And I think what that was a case of jury nullification. he did it. I mean, he admitted to doing what he did. But the jury gets to apply the law as they're instructed by the judge to the facts. They have the absolute right to find him not guilty if that's what they want to do. It doesn't matter if they did it because they felt bad for the guy, because they understand that he snapped in the way he did, because of the way he was treated for years on end. We don't know. We'll never know necessarily. And it doesn't matter. I mean, that is jury nullification, I think. So it's just sort of like I said, Fight Club. And the real thing you need to worry about is if you ever have any interaction with the criminal justice system, is you need to find the right lawyer. You need to find, and that's a common question people have is, well, should I use the public defender? Or should I have my family member use the public defender or the appointed lawyer? Or do we need to go hire a lawyer? There's no good answer to that. And that's not really, we don't have time really to discuss that. But that is the real injustice with the criminal justice system, is the unequal access to justice just based on different lawyers. Some lawyers are better than others. And in the end, as a criminal defendant, the only ability you have is to have somebody stand up and talk to the 12 jurors who are picked for the case and convince them to check the box, not guilty. Now, that is a very subjective thing. So you have to be very comfortable with who you choose. That could be a free public defender or appointed lawyer, depending on who it is, or it could be somebody that you can't afford. All right, so I really need to get going now, but those are my thoughts on what's going on. We'll see what happens with the recounts, but I think the overarching theme is going to be that the state governments are going to become important again. It's going to be important for the state legislatures, and we have a supermajority Republican one now here in West Virginia. It's going to be important for them to do their job, to protect states' rights against a federal government that's going to get increasingly tyrannical. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just going to be, this is mostly campaign rhetoric and kind of like Obama carrying on the Bush administration policies for the most part. It might be something like that, but I don't think so. I think the federal government's going to keep growing and growing. I mean, hell, if Donald Trump couldn't rein them in, this massive bureaucracy, if he couldn't control the FBI, what's going to happen with it under a Joe Biden? I mean, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And states are going to have to really embrace the idea of freedom and go back to the principles of federalism. And the state attorney generals are going to have to protect their people from the federal government. And the state legislators are going to have to grow some balls and protect their people, their constituents, from the federal government. That's what we're going to be looking at. A red state, a free state like West Virginia, protecting the rights that it rightfully has under our form of government. The rights that were not delegated by our Constitution to the federal government, we need to have those protected. So if we want to legalize marijuana, if we want to legalize machine guns, whatever we want to do as a state, my wife is cutting in now. All right, whatever we want to do as a state, we need our legislators to do it. And the states are going to become, state politics is going to become much more important. And that's why, if you care about freedom, you're going to need to get involved. And I know just the way you can do it. I'm going to make a video about it, and maybe next week or the week after that. But please subscribe and set your notifications to be notified when I do a live video, because there is no set time, because I do have an important day job with different deadlines at different times and different hearings. So again, thanks for watching. Oh, I gotta go. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.